The Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire was one of the most significant events in the Spanish colonization of the Americas, following Christopher Columbus's establishment of permanent European settlement in the Caribbean. The Spanish authorized expeditions or entradas for the discovery, conquest, and colonization of new territory, using existing Spanish settlements as a base. Many of those on the Cortés expedition of 1519 had never seen combat before. In fact, Cortés had never commanded men in battle before. However, there was a whole generation of Spaniards who participated in expeditions in the Caribbean and tierra firma, learning strategy and tactics of successful enterprises. The Spanish conquest of Mexico had antecedents with established practices. The Spanish campaign began in February 1519 and was declared victorious on August 13, 1521, when a coalition army of Spanish forces and native Tlaxcalan warriors led by Hernán Cortés and Xicoténcatl the Younger captured the Emperor Cuauhtémoc in Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire. During the campaign, Cortés was given support from a number of tributaries and rivals of the Aztecs, including the Totonacs and the Tlaxcaltecas, Texcocans, and other city-states particularly bordering Lake Texcoco. In their advance, the Allies were tricked and ambushed several times by the people they encountered. After 8 months of battles and negotiations, which overcame the diplomatic resistance of the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma II to his visit, Cortés arrived in Tenochtitlan on November 8, 1519, where he took up residence, welcomed by Moctezuma. When news reached Cortés of the death of several of his men during the Aztec attack on the Totonacs in Veracruz, he took the opportunity to take Moctezuma captive. Moctezuma allowed himself to be captured as a diplomatic gesture. Capturing the Kashikor indigenous ruler was standard operating procedure for Spaniards in their expansion in the Caribbean, so capturing Moctezuma had considerable precedent, which might well have included those in Spain during the Christian reconquest of territory held by Muslims. When Cortés left Tenochtitlan to return to the coast and deal with the expedition of Panfilo de Narvaez, Pedro de Alvarado was left in charge. Alvarado allowed a significant Aztec feast to be celebrated in Tenochtitlan and on the pattern of the earlier massacre in Cholula, closed off the square and massacred the celebrating Aztec noblemen. The biography of Cortés by Francisco López de Gomara contains a description of the massacre. The Alvarado massacre at the main temple of Tenochtitlan precipitated rebellion by the population of the city, when the captured Emperor Moctezuma II, now seen as a mere puppet of the invading Spaniards, attempted to calm the outraged populace. He was killed by a projectile. Cortés, who by then had returned to Tenochtitlan, and his men fled the capital city during the Noche Triste in June 1520. The Spanish, Tlaxcalans and reinforcements returned a year later on August 13, 1521 to a civilization that had been wiped out by famine and smallpox. This made it easier to conquer the remaining Aztecs. The fall of the Aztec Empire was the key event in the formation of the Spanish Overseas Empire, with New Spain, which later became Mexico, a major component. Significant events in the conquest of central Mexico. Historical sources for the conquest of Mexico recount some of the same events in both Spanish and indigenous sources. Others, however, are unique to a particular primary source, a group narrating the event. Individuals and groups laud their own accomplishments while often denigrating or ignoring those of their opponents or their allies or both. Aztec omens for the conquest. In the sources recorded by Franciscan Bernardino de Sahagun and Dominican Diego Duran, There are accounts of events of a supernatural nature that could be seen as omens of the conquest. These two accounts are full-blown narratives from the viewpoint of the Spaniards' opponents. Most first-hand accounts about the conquest of the Aztec Empire were written by Spaniards. Hernán Cortés' letters to Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, and the first-person narrative of Bernal Diaz del Castillo, the true history of the conquest of New Spain. The primary sources from the native people affected as a result of the conquest are seldom observed because they tend to reflect the views of a particular native group, such as the Tlaxcalans. Indigenous accounts were written in pictographs as early as 1525. Later accounts were written in the native tongue of the Aztecs and the native peoples of central Mexico, Nahuatl. It is also important to note that the native texts of the defeated Mexican narrating the version of the conquest described 8 omens that were believed to have occurred 9 years prior to the arrival of the Spanish from the Gulf of Mexico. The 8 bad omens are wonders, a column of fire that appeared from midnight until dawn, and seemed to rain fire in the year 1517. Fire consuming the temple of Huitzilopochtli, a lightning bolt destroying the straw temple of Xiuhtecuhtli. The appearance of fire, or comets, streaming across the sky in threes during the day, the boiling deep and water flooding of a lake nearby Tenochtitlan, a woman, Xochitl, weeping in the middle of the night for them to flee far away from this city, a two-headed man, Lycantholi, running through the streets, Montezumas or the stars of Mamalhuatztli, and images of fighting men riding on the backs of animals resembling deer, in a mirror on the crown of a bird caught by fishermen. Additionally, the Tlaxcala saw a radiance that shone in the east every morning 3 hours before sunrise, and a whirlwind of dust from Matlalcuay. According to Diaz, these caciques also told us of a tradition they had heard from their ancestors, that one of the idols which they particularly worshipped had prophesied the coming of men from distant lands in the direction of the sunrise, who would conquer them and rule them. Omens were extremely important to the Aztecs, who believed that history repeated itself. Emperor Moctezuma, often spelled Montezuma in English, who was trained as a high priest, was said to have consulted his chief priests and fortune-tellers to determine the causes of these omens. However, they were unable to provide an exact explanation until, perhaps, the Spaniards arrived. A number of modern scholars cast doubt on whether such omens occurred or whether they were ex post facto creations to help the Mexica explain their defeat. Many sources depicting omens and the return of old Aztec gods, including those supervised by Spanish priests, were written after the fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521. Some ethno-historians say that when the Spanish arrived, native peoples and the leaders did not view them as supernatural in any sense, but rather as simply another group of powerful outsiders. Many Spanish accounts incorporated omens to emphasize what they saw as the preordained nature of the conquest and the success as Spanish destiny. This means that native emphasis on omens and bewilderment in the face of invasion may be a post-conquest interpretation by informants who wished to please the Spaniards or who resented the failure of Montezuma and of the warriors of Tenochtitlan to provide leadership. Hugh Thomas concludes that Moctezuma was confused and ambivalent about whether Cortés was a god or the ambassador of a great king in another land. However, Thomas does not support the theory that the Aztec emperor really believed that Cortés was any reincarnation of Calcotl. Spanish arrival in Yucatan. In 1517, Cuban governor Diego Velázquez de Cuetllar commissioned a fleet of 3 ships under the command of Hernández de Córdoba to sail west and explore the Yucatan Peninsula. Córdoba reached the coast of Yucatan Yucatan. The Mayans at Cape Catoche invited the Spaniards to land, and the Spaniards read the requirement of 1513 to them, which offered the natives the protection of the King of Spain, if they would submit to him. Cordoba took 2 prisoners, who adopted the baptized names of Melchor and Julian, and became interpreters. On the western side of the Yucatan Peninsula, the Spaniards were attacked at night by Maya chief Moctezuma. 50 Spaniards were killed. Cordoba was mortally wounded and only a remnant of his crew returned to Cuba. Yucatan was briefly explored by the Spanish, but the Spanish conquest of Yucatan with its many independent city-state polities of the late post-classic Maya civilization came many years after the Spaniards' rapid conquest of central Mexico, 1519–21. With the help of tens of thousands of ex-IU Mayan warriors, it would take more than 170 years for the Spanish to establish full control of the Maya homelands, which extended from northern Yucatan to the central lowlands region of El Petén and the southern Guatemalan highlands. The end of this latter campaign is generally marked by the downfall of the Maya state based at Ayazul in the Petén region, in 1697.